we're going to be talking about modesty. And modesty is having a humble temper. Now, what do you usually think of when you hear the word temper? What do you think of? Yeah.
Angry.
Getting angry. And that's a lot of how we use that word. But the real meaning or the exact meaning of the word temper is our frame of mind or our mindset, how we think. So we're to have a humble mindset, a humble temper. You can have an angry temper, you can have a humble temper, you can have a proud temper, you can have a gentle temper. And so we're going to be looking at having a humble temper, a humble way of thinking. Now, this is important because the Bible tells us in Proverbs chapter 23 in verse 7, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So the Bible is telling us the way that we think influences the rest of us, the rest of what we are. So how I think affects my attitudes. How I think also affects what I do, my actions. So, if we are not modest or humble, we would be proud, conceited. Do you know what conceited is? Have you heard that word before?
No.
Never. Okay. So conceited is being proud, is having a really high opinion of yourself. Do you know what I mean by that? Thinking that you're the greatest.
Basically proud.
Yes, exactly. So conceit is definitely pride. It also includes self-importance, thinking that I'm the most important. Self-exaltation, in other words, lifting myself up. Bragging is another word. Boasting. Would you say bragging or boasting?
Bragging.
Bragging. You know what that is, right? So being conceited often leads to bragging. Now, all of those things have what at the center? Me, I, self, right? Okay, and so we know that pride and selfishness go together. Now, does God want us to be selfish?
No.
Does he want us to be proud?
No.
No. So he does not approve of that. He wants us to have this attitude, modesty, which includes being humble. Now, if we are proud, some of the things that we might do, we might show off. Do you ever show off? Maybe once in a while. Sometimes. I think we all show off a little bit sometimes. If you're really good at something, it's hard not to show off sometimes, isn't it? Now, it doesn't mean that we can't be happy when we do a good job. If you get a really good grade at school, should you be happy about that? Of course. You worked hard to get that good grade, right?
Yeah.
But we shouldn't brag about it or go showing everybody, look, I'm awesome, That's the wrong attitude behind doing a good job, isn't it? So we should do a good job. And we can be happy about doing a good job, but we shouldn't be bragging about it or showing off. Anything that we do that draws attention to ourselves. Maybe if we're in a group and we start talking really loud, we're trying to draw attention to ourselves, right? So that's a form of pride as well. Because anything that brings attention to self, to me, that has to do with pride. So we are not to have that. We are to have this kind of spirit, a modest spirit, a humble mindset. Now, we saw that that is true in the first verse that we looked at, because how we think affects what we do, doesn't it? If we're proud, those kind of thoughts, self-importance, conceit, vanity, and we're going to talk about what those are, they lead to thinking about self, which makes you selfish, brag, pushy, always want your way and trying to get your way, but it also leads to shame. But if we have a modest, humble way of thinking, it makes us selfless, quiet, peaceful, we could say, and gentle, not pushy. And because we're thinking of others, not self. And this leads to wisdom. Now, we want to look at Philippians chapter 2, and I have that verse here, the verse is printed out here. We also want to have this kind of mindset because we're told to have this kind of mindset. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So the same kind of way of thinking that Jesus had, that's supposed to be my way of thinking. You think that's a impossible thing to do? No, hopefully not. But we won't do it as perfectly as Jesus does, but we're supposed to try. Now, what in particular does he want us to have as thinking like Jesus? Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Was Jesus Christ God? He was. Was he equal with God? Yeah, he was. But did he go around being a bully because he was the Son of God and getting his own way? No, he didn't do that. But made himself of no reputation. Instead, what did he do? He took upon him the form of a servant. Would you like to be a servant? Most of us wouldn't like that, would we? No, we would like to be the boss or have other people serve us. But Jesus was willing to come and to serve others. When Jesus was here, who did he think about?
Others.
Others. What are some examples of Jesus thinking of others? Him healing people, right? Was he thinking about himself? No, and he even kept healing people till he was exhausted, really tired, didn't he? Because it wasn't about Jesus, it wasn't about him, it was about others. He fed people. He could have just said, oh, I've got food here, who cares what happens to them? But he served, didn't he? He thought about others. So we are to think like that. We are to be humble because Jesus was humble and be willing to serve. It takes humility to serve others, doesn't it? It's not always the easy thing to do. Now we want to look at these words that I've written on the board that will help us to understand what we should not have and what we should have. Now once again, the word temper we often think of as being angry, don't we? But it actually means our frame of mind, our mindset, the way we think. So we want to make sure that we have the right temper, that we have a humble temper. If we have a proud temper, that leads to angry, which is what we usually think of when we think of the word temper, right? Yeah. Now this word conceit, you said you never heard of it before, right? It means to be excessively proud. To have an excessively high opinion of yourself. What does that mean?
Basically, again, that you're proud of yourself, maybe bragging.
Mm-hmm.
That you're the best and you're the highest.
Yep. And a lot of times along with that, putting myself way up here, what makes me do what with others? Push them way down here, right? So I push myself up and I push others down when I'm conceited. And we could use, have you heard the word being a snob?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, isn't it? Well, we don't want to be conceited and we definitely don't want to be a snob. Something else that goes along with that is vanity. Now this is having excessive pride or an excessively high opinion of how you look. Now, should we want to look like a slob, be dirty? No, we should be clean and we should do our best to look nice. But does that mean that we should spend hours and hours Making ourselves look really, really good?
No.
No, that's an excessive amount, isn't it? And that's vanity. But also vanity, we spend a lot of time and we're overly concerned about how we look. But then we think we look better than everybody else too. That's not a good way. Even if you're handsome or you're pretty, that's okay. God made you that way. But we shouldn't be proud and think we're better than others for that, should we? All right. And sometimes it also applies to being excessively proud about our achievements, what we've actually been able to do. Now do you play tennis?
Yeah,
Are you good at it?
pretty much.
Yeah, well that's fine. You're working at it, aren't you? And you take lessons too, don't you? Or you did? Okay. So you would expect yourself to be learning and to become pretty good at that. That's fine. To realize that you're making improvements, you're becoming pretty good. I mean, if you win matches, then obviously you're becoming pretty good, right? But to be vain about it, to put a higher opinion of yourself than you should, then that's not good, because then what do? Anybody who makes a mistake at tennis, you kind of look at them. That's not the right attitude, is it? No, we can't have that kind of attitude. All right, now the attitudes that we should have are meek, lowly, demure, and humble. Now when we say, what is meek? Oftentimes we say it's the same as being humble, don't we? But it has a little bit of maybe a different facet, a different look at humility. It includes the idea of being quiet. Now, if somebody's loud all the time, often they can be proud, unless maybe they have a hearing problem and they're loud because they can't hear well. So meekness is quiet, but it also gives the idea, not just that quiet, also gives the idea of at peace. All right? They're gentle. To be meek is to be gentle and also submissive. They're willing to give in to others, to let them have their way. Now, whose way do we often want? Our own way, yes. And when we want our own way and we're insistent upon that, are we very humble? What often happens when we insist on our way?
Fight.
Maybe. Or at least arguing, right? Anything else?
I don't know.
Okay. Usually there's some arguing that goes on, right? And sometimes it can get a little carried away and somebody might start wrestling or fighting over it. And that's not being meek. That's being proud and being pushy and selfish. But when we're meek, we're willing to give in to the other person and let them have their way. Now, what does it mean to be lowly? Jesus is described as being meek and lowly, and we're going to look at that verse in just a few minutes. Lowly means to be lower, to lower yourself, to have a lower view of your importance. If we're conceited, we have a very high view of our importance. We think we are really, really important. But if we're lowly, we realize we're more down here. Not necessarily the very lowest. Doesn't mean to walk around and go, I'm the worst, I'm horrible. That's not it. But to have a realistic opinion of yourself, not an inflated or excessive opinion of yourself. You think that's important? Yeah. Somebody thinks they're really, really important. What happens usually?
Start getting pushy.
Start getting pushy. Do you like to be around those kind of people?
Not really.
Not really. No, nobody really likes to be around those kind of people, do we? All right. So another word is to be demure. And this has the idea of being reserved, modest. But we're trying to define modest, so we want to talk about reserved. Do you know what that means, to be reserved?
Let others go first, basically.
Okay, to hold back, yeah. So it is a more of idea of in quietness be reserved. Now, we all have opinions about most everything, don't we?
Yeah.
But do I need to tell everybody every opinion I have?
No.
No. Sometimes I need to be reserved. I need to hold those back. Does everybody care about my opinion? Probably not.
No.
I'd like to think that everybody wants to know my opinion, especially if I'm thinking about myself. But if I'm thinking about others, I'm going to be reserved. I'm going to hold back my opinion because I care about them and I care about their opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not always out there making sure everybody hears our opinion. We're willing to hold back and listen to other people. And of course, we all know what humble is, right? Humble is not proud, right? So it has a moderate opinion of self. Not putting myself way down at the bottom. If I'm actually good at something, you're good at tennis, so you shouldn't walk around saying, oh, I'm the worst at tennis, if that's not true. But we probably shouldn't be walking around saying, oh, I'm the very best ever, right? So we have a moderate, a realistic opinion of ourselves and where we're at in tennis, in school, in singing, in art, in whatever we're talking about. Now, Jesus is described as being meek and lowly. In fact, he used those words to describe himself. He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." So these things we have to learn about. We have to know what they are, but then it takes time to put them into practice, the ones that we're supposed to have. "For I am meek and lowly in heart." And if we learn meekness and being lowly in heart from Jesus, he gives us a promise, "Ye shall find rest unto your souls." Now, if someone is proud, is it very peaceful around them?
No.
No, there's a lot of arguing, strife, we might say, contention, maybe frustration and irritation. That is not rest. That is not peace. Jesus said if we're meek and lowly like he is, we'll have rest or we'll have peace. There won't be all that arguing and contention and fighting. What's the result you would like to have? Peace or arguing?
Peace.
Peace. So how do we make sure we have that result?
While being quiet.
By having Jesus' attitudes, right? By being, you're right, by being quiet, meek, lowly. Very good. Now, that was a little bit different way of thinking about things when Jesus said that, but it's right and it's proved to be true over the years, of course, because Jesus is always right. Now, in those days when Jesus was here, there were some people called Pharisees. Do you remember the Pharisees?
And there were people who were like kind of like priests, like the top men.
Yeah, really religious, important people. And they knew the scriptures, the Old Testament, and they wanted to, maybe they started out okay. They wanted to make sure that they were really good, and so they made even more rules than what God made. And they kept all these really strict rules. And so they looked on the outside to be really good people. In fact, people usually would honor them when they would see a Pharisee and think that they were righteous. And then there was another kind of person called a publican. Now, sometimes we hear that word today and it means somebody who owns a pub, right? But it wasn't that way back in the New Testament. It was a tax collector. Now, you don't have to pay tax yet, right?
No.
No, but your mom does if she works, right? And she earns money. And your mom would be so happy if she could keep all of the money she earns and not have to pay tax, wouldn't she?
Actually, she doesn't have to pay tax because she works as a cleaner.
Oh, okay. Well, tax collectors in this day kind of deduct the tax from your paycheck sometimes. And so you don't have to think too much about it. But back then they didn't have paychecks, they didn't have online banking, and so they actually received their money and then they had to pay the tax man, the publican. And these publicans would come around and collect the tax, and they were known to be cheaters. They say, you owe 100 euros. And maybe you really only owed 75. You know, they would give the government the 75 and they'd take that 25 extra and put it in their own pocket. Do you think they were liked?
No.
No, they weren't. They were thought to be horrible, terrible sinners kind of people. And it was hard to have friends if you became a tax collector, a publican. So Jesus is going to tell them a parable about a Pharisee and a publican. Now, and he's telling it to people who think that because of what they do, they are so good and so righteous and they're on their way to heaven. And Jesus wants to teach them a lesson. So the Pharisee and the publican, if you were to look at those two men, which one would you think, just right off the top of your head, would be the one that's going to heaven?
Well, the Pharisee.
Yeah, because on the outside he looks really good, doesn't he? He looks like a really good person. But Jesus wanted them to see that what's in your heart is much more important. So these two men, they both came to the temple to pray, but the Pharisee came and he stood in the middle and he lifted his eyes up to heaven and his hands up, and he was just drawing attention to himself by doing that, wasn't he? And then when he began to pray, instead of being humble, he began to thank God that he was not as other people are, like this publican. And then he started listing all of these amazingly good things that he does. I think he's pretty proud, don't you? Well, he thought that would impress God and God would be happy with him. Then Jesus pointed to the other man, the publican, who was drawn off to the side, and he didn't lift his eyes up to heaven. No, he was ashamed of his sin. He humbled himself. He kept his eyes down, his head bowed, and it says that he beat upon his chest and he said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So he was, one, admitting that he was a sinner, and two, he was asking for God's mercy or God's forgiveness. Then Jesus asked a question of the people that he was telling the parable to, which of these two men was justified or forgiven?
The publican.
You're right. And why was he the one that was forgiven?
Because he was humble and the Pharisee was proud.
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to be humble.
Good. And because he was humble, he admitted he was a sinner, didn't he? And he knew he needed God's forgiveness. Because he asked for God's forgiveness, God forgave him. Did the other man ask for forgiveness?
No.
No, he was trying to impress God with how good he already was, wasn't he? And so Jesus said, this man went down to his house justified or forgiven rather than the other man. And then Jesus said, those who exalt themselves, lift themselves up, will be abased. In other words, they'll be humbled. And those who abase themselves, they humble themselves, shall be exalted. What do you think about that verse?
Basically, the Lord is telling you that when you're praying, you can't be proud of yourself because you're good at something and other people aren't. Basically being proud. And but how he actually wants you to be is to be humble and not make yourself be like proud, think that you're better than others.
Very good.
Basically think of others.
Very good. And when we lift ourselves up like we're better than other people, God is going to bring something into our life to humble us, isn't He? And when we humble ourselves, God is going to be the one that lifts us up. Now, I want us to look at one last verse, and this is going to be our memory verse, but I wrote it out on the board. It said, when pride cometh, in other words, when we have pride, there's gonna be a consequence. There's gonna be a result. That result is, then cometh shame. But, so something opposite, with the lowly or the humble is wisdom. Can you think of anybody in the Bible who, when they were proud, they were humbled, or there was something shameful happened to them as a result of their pride?
They got shame.
They got shame?
They were proud.
Yeah.
Proud.
What about King Saul? Was he proud or humble?
I think he was proud at first.
I think he started out humble, but then he got proud, didn't he? And he tried to, what did he try to do to David?
Tried to kill him.
Yeah, and what happened to him in the end?
He got killed by a Philistine.
Yeah, that's pretty humbling, isn't it? It's shameful for a king to be killed by his enemy. So he let pride come in, and then shame came in after that pride, didn't it? He didn't humble himself and repent. He just kept going in the same direction, and God allowed something shameful to happen to him. I also think of Nebuchadnezzar. Do you remember Nebuchadnezzar?
Yes.
He took 4 boys from Judea into Babylon. Do you remember their names? And he took
Isaac, Shanae,
Daniel,
obviously.
Shadrach,
and
Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
well, they didn't. I don't know. There's different versions, and this is the version I heard. I think they were Nebuchadnezzar told them to learn their languages, something like that. And David understood the most.
We remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego mostly for them being put in the fiery furnace, don't we? And did they get burned up?
No.
No. Why did King Nebuchadnezzar put them in that fiery furnace?
Because they weren't bound down to his statue that he built.
Yeah. And they knew to worship any statue, any idol was wicked, not pleasing to God. But this particular idol or statue showed that Nebuchadnezzar was very proud. He made a golden image of himself. So when they bowed down to the statue, who were they really worshiping? Nebuchadnezzar. That's pretty proud, isn't it? To put yourself as God? That's very proud. Well, he didn't win that, did he? Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they went into the fire, but what happened to them?
They didn't get burnt.
That's right. And then Nebuchadnezzar realized he was wrong. And after that, God had Daniel warn Nebuchadnezzar about being proud. And if he became proud, that God would humble him. Well, he did okay for a little while, and then one day he was looking out over the great city of Babylon, and he started bragging and saying, look at my great kingdom and all the great things that I have done. I have done it by the strength of my own arm. Did he give God any credit? Who made him king or allowed him to be king?
God.
God. Who made him healthy and strong?
God.
Who made him smart?
God.
Yeah, but he was taking it all on himself. He was being pretty proud, wasn't he? And you know, right away, He became as a beast. That means he became like an animal. He actually went out into the field and ate grass like a cow for 7 years. Is that pretty shameful? Especially if you're living in the palace. So God, when he became proud, God brought shame upon Nebuchadnezzar until Nebuchadnezzar finally, after 7 years, humbled himself and admitted that God in heaven is the greatest. And then God allowed him to no longer be like a beast and be like a human being once again. So for me, that's a great example of that verse as well. Are you ready to memorize verse? It's short. I think you'll have no problem remembering that one this week. Okay. When pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 2. Ready to say it right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
When pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom.
Good.
Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2.
Excellent. Very good. You have no problem remembering that for next week, right? Very good. Okay. Can you have 2?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, you like lemon.
Yeah.
Ah. Do you like sour things? Me too. Do you like rhubarb?
Like what?
Rhubarb?
What's that?
Well, I guess it's you can get rhubarb crumble or rhubarb pie. It's a stalk, but when you cook it, it kind of looks reddish.
Oh, that. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You like that, yeah?
Yeah.
That's, well, we add sugar to it, but it still has a little bit of tang, tartness, right?
Yeah.
I like that too. All right, we're gonna sing. I hope you remember this song. Do you remember this one?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Work on your attitudes. All right, you gotta help me sing it, right?
Okay.
Okay. Work on your attitudes the way you know you should. Put away those selfish thoughts and think only on good. Check all your motives, make sure they pass the test. Then the Lord will help you to do your very best. You've got to work on your attitudes in all you do and say. Look for opportunities to practice them each day. People around you are watching all you do, so work on your attitudes. Faith, joy, and gratitude. Yes, work on your attitudes today and this week. That's right, not just one day, the whole week, right? Okay, and I know you know this one. We sang this one recently. Yeah? Okay. I met Jesus at the crossroads where the two ways meet. Satan too was standing there and he said, come this way. Lots and lots of pleasures I will give to you today. But I said no, there's Jesus here. See what he offers me. Down here my sins forgiven, up there a home in heaven. Praise God, that's the way for me. All right, very good. You have a nice voice, Lucas. You sing nicely. Okay. And if we sang a third song, would you want to sing Trust and Obey, Do You Know, Christian, or The Lord is My Shepherd?
And you know Christian.
Ah, yes, that's a fun one, isn't it?
I chose it because I thought that it's like that I don't remember. I forgot what it was. The shoe one?
Yep, it's the shoe one. Yep, okay. So I gotta put this over here because there's so many pieces, it's hard to hold all of them, isn't it? Okay, ready? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Jesus counts upon you to spread the gospel news, so walk it and talk it, a sermon in shoes. Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Jesus counts upon you to spread the gospel news, so walk it and talk it and live it and give it, a sermon in shoes. Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Jesus counts upon you to spread the gospel news, so walk it and talk it and live it and give it and know it and show it, a sermon in shoes. Okay, one more time, ready? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Do you know, oh Christian, you're a sermon in shoes? Jesus counts upon you to spread the gospel news, so walk it and talk it and live it and give it and know it and show it and teach it and preach it, a sermon in shoes. That's a fun song, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think so.
But for some reason, before we even start the shoe part, I just keep on smiling for some reason. Why?
I don't know. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to say goodbye to everybody online. You want to say goodbye with me?
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. We hope to see you again next week. Finished. And then you can just turn off the camera too as well.
Do we do something there?
Don't worry about that. Just turn the camera off for sure.